Good morning from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. Right now, I'm joined by Ezra Klein, MSNBC policy analyst, Washington Post columnist, and Bloomberg contributor. Avik Roy, member of Mitt Romney's Healthcare Policy Advisory Group, senior fellow at Manhattan Institute, and healthcare policy writer for Forbes and the National Review. Congresswoman Yvette Clarke, Democrat from New York, also my congresswoman until January. There's this parking sign outside my house we got to talk about. And
municipal.
well, let's see if we can maybe get a sort of special bill pushed through in a lame duck session. Akhil Amar, returning to the program. Great to have you back. Professor of Law and Political Science at Yale University and former law clerk for Judge Stephen Breyer. It's great to have you all here. Avik, what was your reaction to the ruling and to the president making that remark, noting the thing that everybody always talks about in this context, which is that, of course, the Massachusetts healthcare plan that Mitt Romney signed into law included a mandate structured essentially identically?
Yeah, I mean, I would say in terms of the ruling, I think there's a difference in the formulation of judicial activism that you described in your opening segment and what conservatives describe. When we talk about judicial activism, what we're talking about is, are you making up law from the bench, or are you administering the Constitution as it was written in 1789?
But that's the whole. But let me just stop you there, because this is precisely the issue, right? If it were manifestly plain what the law meant as it was written, then we could hire robots. We could code computer programs to sit on the bench. The whole point is that the only cases that reach the Supreme Court are difficult matters of interpretive work, and so that definition of activism seems to completely stack the deck definitionally to just produce the result that you want.
I think it's more manifestly plain than you argue. I think that there has been a lot of outcome-driven judicial results in the last 70 years, but that really, if you actually read the Constitution is a short document. It is written in English. The Federalist Papers give us a lot of illumination into how the Constitution was designed. So there is a plain reading of the Constitution that, again, I think either way, I think in this case it is a difficult case, because if you go by New Deal precedents, you can make a case that the individual mandate is constitutional according to the Commerce Clause, and if you go by a plain reading of the original intent of the Commerce Clause, you could say, well, that doesn't make any sense. It's not interstate commerce. However, Roberts did neither of those things. He said it was a tax in one case for the for the purposes of constitutionality, and a penalty for the Anti-Injunction Act, and kind of made it up as he was going along.
Implicit in what you just said is that the true conservative vision is to go back to a constitutional jurisprudence from before the New Deal, the kind of Lochner vision of the court, which I just want to put on the table as a genuinely radical thing to say, whether true or not.
I would say there's within the conservative legal movement, there's two positions. One is the sort of Thomas-oriented position, where it's really about the plain reading. Another is maybe the Scalia-oriented vision, which is you want to respect precedent, be very sensitive to the stability of the country as it is, but having said that, you want to err on the side of constitutional originality.
Really, this or that?
Music on this show.
Engine.
Yeah, constitutional or unconstitutional.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. Avik, we were going back and forth on constitutional law, but there was a few points you want to raise.
No, it's true. Akhil's right that the Constitution gives Congress broad taxing power, but the individual mandate was not passed as a taxing power. It was not. It was angrily President Obama in an interview with George Stephanopoulos said, no, it's not a tax.
He didn't quite say that.
It's a shared responsibility.
I'm with Avik on this. He did say that pretty clearly.
And I think it remains uncertain that if it was billed as a tax when it was going through Congress, would it have passed Congress? I don't know. And I think the other point I would make is, Ezra talks a lot about this in his column about how, well, the lesson that Democrats should learn is don't compromise with Republicans. Let's not forget, Democrats had 60 votes in the Senate. This wasn't a matter. The public option didn't get through the Senate because of Republicans. It was because Joe Lieberman and Ben Nelson didn't like it.
Right.
Yeah, but
Joe Lieberman, not a Democrat.
Constructed the way it was constructed, I mean, without doubt, because they thought this was going to help them get support. I mean, the genesis of this bill is Max Baucus coming out with a white paper of a bill that looks very similar to this one in 2008, and Max Baucus expecting the whole time he will get his friend Senator Chuck Grassley, the Republican from Iowa, to be part of this with him, and it'll be 20 or 10 or 15.
There was a lot of flim-flamming going on during that whole debate. A lot of flim-flamming.
With regards to the mandate, the individual responsibility program, which I proposed, I was very pleased to see that the compromise from the two houses includes the personal responsibility principle. That is essential for bringing health care costs down for everyone. and getting everybody the health insurance they deserve and need.
It's Governor Romney in 2006 talking about Massachusetts care. Avik, I'm very sorry that I interrupted you mid-thought, but continue.
Yeah, so we were talking about the history of the individual mandate among conservatives, and I think...
And the suspicion that liberals have that basically this is a completely disingenuous turn because Democrats adopted it, so they said we don't like it.
Yeah, and I think actually there were some conservative institutions that supported the individual mandate, the Heritage Foundation most famously, but the vast majority of conservative institutions that are involved in healthcare were actually very much opposed to a federal individual mandate, and a lot of that policy debate happened in the early 90s. And it's true that a number of Republican senators, to Ezra's point, did endorse a federal mandate. I think they weren't as aware of the constitutional issues with it because it never became a piece of legislation where the conservative constitutional lawyers, the Randy Barnetts of the world, would have to examine it. I think once people like Orrin Hatch were confronted with those arguments, they had to realize, okay, maybe this is more complicated than I thought at the federal level.
But the one thing I'm sorry, I know Akhil wanted to get into it. Well, just the one thing I'd say is that sometimes the timing on this stuff is what's very frustrating, right? So I asked the Heritage Foundation, you guys tell me, because they're very against it now. They helped come up with it in '89. They're very against it now. I said, tell me the first time you ever came out against the individual mandate. Show me the first written or spoken word from anybody on your team that this is not a good idea, it's unconstitutional. And it was spring of 2008, after all the Democrats had put it in their plans. And this was, Mitt Romney, we just saw, that was 06. It wasn't 1993. And Mitt Romney was endorsed by Senator Jim DeMint, one of the most conservative, sort of Tea Party champions in the Senate. And he said, Mitt Romney was able to do great things on health care in Massachusetts, and we need that kind of thinking nationally. So I think you're right to say there was, particularly as time went on, dissent. That's not the argument, but it was mixed, and then it became complete. It became a complete unified opposition. I think that if 15 Republicans had remained on the individual mandate, nobody would be saying that was disingenuous.
Good morning from New York. I'm Chris Hayes, here with Congresswoman Yvette Clarke, Democrat from New York, representing the borough of Brooklyn, where I live. Akhil Amar, professor of law and political science at Yale University. Ezra Klein, MSNBC political analyst, and Avik Roy, member of Mitt Romney's Healthcare Policy Advisory Group and a healthcare policy writer for Forbes and the National Review. We are, of course, talking about healthcare in the wake of the Supreme Court decision. We had a fascinating constitutional argument with one of the architects of the arguments against the bill. We sort of moved into policy. We've been talking about the individual mandate, and we've been talking about this. There's sort of two questions about the mandate, right? There's the policy question about, is this good policy? Does it work? But then there's this political argument about disingenuousness, right? The sort of frustration, the sense of Lucy in the football, where, well, you guys wanted a mandate, and conservatives said mandate, Republicans said mandate, we say mandate, and then all of a sudden you don't want a mandate. But so let's talk about the actual policy. Is a mandate at any level, state level, federal level, is mandate good policy?
Yeah, I think that if the mandate is used to justify buying very generous comprehensive insurance, it doesn't make a lot of sense because, again, the free rider problem is really only for a limited amount of emergency care. So what you really want to do is you want to create an incentive for people to buy insurance. Make insurance cheaper. You make insurance cheaper by deregulating insurance in the sense of what insurance must contain. Let people buy high deductible policies. Let people have health savings accounts.
But that's not entirely true. What we did within the provisions of the law is to provide various levels of coverage. So not everyone is getting the Cadillac plan. If you can afford the Cadillac plan, you purchase the Cadillac plan. There's a specific preventive care-based model that we're asking individuals to cover themselves with. Right. So it's not completely true.
So, I mean, I disagree with that. I think that actually, and Jonathan Gruber's reports to the state governments about this,
Jonathan Gruber is a health economist at MIT who was crucial in being one of the brain trusts behind Mitt Romney's healthcare in Massachusetts and also worked on the federal program.
He's estimating that in a number of states like Colorado, insurance premiums in the individual market are going to go up by 30% because the law requires these plans to be more financially generous than what people normally buy. Now, a lot of progressive health economists say that's a good thing. We want people to buy very generous, comprehensive insurance.
I want to
generous is doing a lot of work.
Yeah, I want to make one addendum here, which is we're saying that they have to buy more comprehensive plans in some cases than they can currently afford. One reason that these premiums can go up in the way that we're talking about here is that what the plan does now is it gives somebody who doesn't have much money and has trouble buying it a subsidy so they can buy comprehensive health care insurance. I don't think the insurance is nearly as generous at the lower levels, the bronze levels, as you make it sound here, but nevertheless, there's a difference between people simply can't buy insurance that actually covers what they need and cheap insurance.
I hope Congress will roll up its sleeves right now today and start talking about repeal of the health care bill.
I've scheduled a vote for total repeal of the Obamacare bill to occur on Wednesday, July 11th.
So here's my question. It was repeal and replace. Now it's just repeal.
No, it's still repeal and replace.
Well, but here's the thing. It seems to me you have two major political coalitions in this country, one of whom has as a policy objective to cover the uninsured, and one of whom simply does not. I mean, there was 8 years under George W. Bush and Republican Congress, and there was just nothing done aside from the prescription drug benefit for seniors to cover the uninsured. It just strikes me that, it's just not a priority for Republicans. They just don't really care that much about covering the uninsured. That's fine. That's their prerogative. But isn't that the case?
No, I would say Republicans do want to cover the uninsured, but they want to do it in the right way. And I think that's one of the challenges here is coverage. Health insurance is not health care. I think we equate those two things very, very simply. Medicaid in particular provides pretty inadequate care for what you get, particularly for the acute care population. That's why health outcomes in Medicaid are far worse than those for private insurance.
I do want to note there's disagreement.
There's disagreement. That's
significant disagreement.
But I should say, actually, I would say there's very little disagreement about Medicaid versus private insurance. There's disagreement about Medicaid versus being uninsured.
So then I want you to tell me, we're going to take a quick break, but I want you to tell me when we come back what the vision to cover people looks like.
Sure.
And Don, I want you to talk, we're going to talk a little about the Medicaid ruling part of the Supreme Court decision, which got less attention but is really, really important. That's half of those 30 million, probably more than half are getting cut into Medicaid. All that when we come back.
Huge.
Little Ted Leo this morning. So, I mean, I remain skeptical that Republicans care about covering the uninsured, and the skepticism is just grounded in the fact that they had a chance during George W. Bush. If it was a major initiative, they could have done something. It could have done it the right way when they had these majorities. They didn't. What does covering the uninsured look like in Republican world, and what would you say the odds are of that being a piece of legislation that goes anywhere?
Yeah, so I'll say a couple of things. I think you're right that when Republicans had power in the 2000s, it was a strategic mistake not to do something about health care. I think historically, for reasons about when the modern American conservative movement came to be, which was in the 50s when it was about communism, it was about some other things that really didn't involve health care, because Medicare, Medicaid, all these programs emerged in the Great Society in the Lyndon Johnson era. By that time, sort of conservatism as we know it in America was kind of fully formed. So it's been a bit of a
Although Reagan famously recorded an LP that could be played at coffee clutches opposing Medicare.
60s, socialized medicine. No, and so I think there's been an evolution. I think today conservatives do understand that if we don't have our own solutions, then and I think people like myself and other people, I think like Governor Romney, who've been very passionate about the health care issue, who've studied it very carefully and thought about it, and who've tried to enact reforms. I think you're going to see much more momentum in the future. I think Republicans in Congress and conservatives intellectually are much more focused on health care reform today than they were 10 years ago. I think that's a good thing.
Can I ask you a question about that? Just something that's been curious to me. In the past couple of years, there was, I felt, more focus from conservatives on this a few years back. The early versions of the Paul Ryan roadmap, which eventually became the budget, had a big plan that would have covered a number of the uninsured. It was a big health care plan, so not exactly what I would do, but it was serious. It disappeared when they moved to the budget. And in Romney's bill, or Romney's proposal so far, what's there in terms of the uninsured is very vague. He's very specific on cutting Medicaid, very unspecific on covering the uninsured. So what should I look at that would make me confident this will really be there? I agree with the conservative intellectual movement is thinking a lot about health care. But it seems that conservative politicians have sort of looked at this, and they see the upside of repeal, they believe in repeal, and they're kind of backing off.
No, I would say, so, let's also remember that John McCain in 2008 proposed universal catastrophic, health insurance, and President Obama or Senator Obama then campaigned against it. So it's not like Republicans have not had solutions. I think it's also a matter of priority and emphasis. And I think now in this election, it is going to be a matter of priority and emphasis. I think Governor Romney has articulated kind of the broad outlines of his replace approach, and it's going to be different, very different from the Affordable Care Act. It's going to be, again, as you say, the priorities are about market reforms rather than and more choice and competition.
A key point about the political landscape there is that it may be popular for Republican governors to say, we're not going to take this, and I'm standing up against Obamacare.
Take it anymore.
But the hospitals are going to want that money, and they actually they can call up the governor.
And what's interesting is it's much more money if you have a sparse Medicaid program right now. So a state like Texas that has a very low Medicaid, it's not a generous Medicaid program, they get a ton of money because they're getting brought all the way up to this new expansion on the 90-10 match. A state like Massachusetts, which already has a very generous Medicaid program, is getting very little. So the particular states we're talking about here, it's a massive red state transfer, huge. And in the long run, that's going to be a very compelling fiscal incentive.
That's right.
One mention, Chris, about this is that, speaking of fiscal incentives, I wrote about this for Forbes on Thursday, is that because of this new opt-out that the Supreme Court has created for the Medicaid program, and because of the way
for Medicaid expansion,
the Medicaid expansion, and the way that overlaps with the subsidized exchanges that are also part of the law, a number of states like New York, New Jersey, California, states with existing generous Medicaid programs, they may have the ability to pare those Medicaid programs back to put more of those individuals on the exchanges. And that has the potential to expand the deficit considerably. Douglas Holtz-Eakin, a former CBO director, Congressional Budget Office director, has estimated this could cost as much as $500 billion over 10 years.
To move people from Medicaid to the private market.
Because it's more generous insurance.
Medicaid
There's more expensive on a per capita basis.
Dom, what do you think of that?
Well, this is going to take a couple of weeks for everyone to sort out, but the law basically says that between 100 and 132% of poverty, a person could go into the exchanges, and that's 100% federal, all of the subsidies, federal money, instead of staying in Medicaid. We don't know what I don't know what happens in the gap. Let's say you're at a state that's current cutoff is 50% of poverty. There's a group of people between 50 and 100%, and if you stay out of the Medicaid expansion system, what happens with respect to exchanges? I do not know the answer to that, and I think there's going to be some fine analysis of exactly what would apply.
Avik Roy.
We learned this week that the Federalist Society whiffed once again. The conservative intellectual movement has invested 30 years in building up a legal community that could appoint strict constructionists to the Supreme Court who look at the original intent and language of the Constitution. Looks like they missed out once again.
I'm not so sure about that. It's going to be very interesting to see what the Roberts Courts looks like in the wake of this. I mean, I think there's a certain there's one interpretation that this was just what he was persuaded by. The other is that he is essentially storing up some reputational capital, which he will then begin to spend over the course of what will be probably one of the longest terms as Supreme Court Justice in the nation's history, if not the longest. He's the youngest since Justice Marshall way back at the dawn of the Republic. My thanks to Congresswoman Yvette Clarke, Democrat from New York, Akhil Amar from Yale University, Ezra Klein, MSNBC policy analyst, and Avik Roy from the Manhattan Institute. Thanks for getting up.